Let's bring in the DA leader, John Steenhuisen. They are seeking to take the legal route around this question of rotational learning. Thank you for your time, Mr. Steenhuisen. When we say you are seeking to take the legal route, what exactly are you doing?
Well, what we're doing is instructing our attorneys to draft papers to approach the High Court on an urgent basis.
Mr. Steenhuisen, for some reason, I can't hear you on my side. Are you by any chance muted?
No, it's all good, my side.
I've got you now. Now I've got you. So when we say you are taking the legal route, what exactly are you doing?
Well, we've instructed our attorneys to start drafting papers to approach the High Court on an urgent basis, to compel the Department of Basic Education and to scrap the rotational system and commence the new school year with full class capacities. Given the fact that there's a huge impact on particularly disadvantaged learners from poorer communities in the lower quintiles who are being discriminated against by this and are disproportionately being affected by it, we believe it's discriminatory as well as entrenching inequality in South Africa, because these learners are suffering at the hands of a policy that is no longer required to beat the COVID-19 pandemic, and which has long since been abandoned by many, many other countries as they've returned their schools to normal capacity.
I don't like the language of quintiles, Mr. Steenhuisen. It's terminology used by the Department of Basic Education. But in essence, what you are saying is that this disadvantages schools in poorer communities.
Definitely, and the dropout rate is disproportionately higher in those communities. Children who are not attending school in those communities have been missing out generally on the one meal a day which they get in the school feeding scheme, and so they are being disadvantaged by malnutrition as well. And as we know, South Africa remains an unequal country. One of the best ways of addressing inequality is through providing good quality education to as many pupils in as many communities as possible. Many students have lost 50% of their school year in 2020 and 2021, and we've had now scientific evidence that this has affected the reading rate in 62 to 81% of pupils in grade 4 have had a reading loss. In grade 2, 57 to 70% have had a reading loss. We've already got very low school outcomes as compared to the rest of the continent. And the longer this ridiculous process of rotational learning remains in place, the longer these poorer students are going to be disadvantaged, and it's going to end up deepening inequality, and we're going to end up with a far bigger crisis than the COVID-19 pandemic ever could have brought onto South Africa if this continues.
So as you and I are talking, we've been showing visuals, archive material that shows a typical classroom in South Africa in the public schooling system. This has its genesis, this controversy now around rotational learning. It has its genesis in the requirement of a 1 meter distance between pupils in a classroom, which in turn has its genesis in the regulations that are passed by the Minister of Cooperative Governance in consultation with other colleagues, which also then resides, which is in the province of the Disaster Management Act. So it's all linked. Do you foresee a challenge to the rotational system that doesn't have a domino effect of challenging everything all the way to the Disaster Management Act itself? And you and I have seen over the last 2 years how those have gone before the courts. Not so great.
Well, we're already waiting for our day in court. We appealed the High Court's ruling which on the constitutionality of the Disaster Management Act, which we believe is unconstitutional in that it allows essentially the Minister of Cooperative Governance to keep South Africa in a state of disaster as long as he or she wants to, at the stroke of a pen, with no reference to public input or getting any input from the elected representatives in Parliament. And so we're challenging the constitutionality of that. I think that it is crazy that we're still in a state of disaster. That state of disaster should have lapsed at the beginning of this month. Many other countries around the world have started to lift up the restrictions. They're trying to get the economies and their societies back to normal as much as possible. The 1 meter doesn't make any sense. We already know that the Omicron variant has got a very, very low mortality or serious sickness rate. We also know that that age group, the school-going age group, are the least vulnerable. If there are teachers with comorbidities or teachers who are concerned, they've had more than enough time now to get vaccinated to be able to protect themselves from serious illness or death. And so it makes no sense whatsoever to keep this absurd policy in place. It's only going to lose more of the school year this time, lead to more dropouts, and lead to a decline in education quality and standard in South Africa.
My last question to you, Mr. Steenhuisen, is linked to that last part of what you just said around teachers with comorbidities needing to, having had enough time to get vaccinated. I'm intrigued. I saw your statement under the hand of Gwen Ngwenya, your head of policy. Here's something I didn't expect. I didn't expect that you would be, you're saying you are strongly for vaccinations, but strongly against mandatory vaccinations. That's your firm position now that you've taken. How do you reconcile your arguments for full reopening of various systems in the country with your position that says absolutely not to mandatory vaccines?
Well, mandatory vaccines don't work, and we've seen in the countries that have attempted to use them that they don't have an efficacy, and they're no more effective in the fight against coronavirus than a well-considered communication campaign from government that encourages people to be vaccinated. And in fact, if you look in countries like Germany and other countries in Europe as well, there's a big move in those countries against mandatory vaccination, and we certainly will not support mandatory vaccination, but we do support an expansion of the vaccination program and governments educating people to do so. We believe that people cannot be forced to take vaccines, and we don't think it would be right. But here's the thing. Schools are low-risk environments, and like any crisis, you have to balance the risk. There is a much lower risk for school-going children of contracting coronavirus and getting sick and dying than the risk of them losing out on a decent future because they have not had a decent education is far greater and will have far longer impact on South Africa. So we're encouraging as many people to get vaccinated as possible, but if we're going to get our country back to normal, to get us back on a solid footing, start to rebuild our economy and rebuild our lives, we've got to get government's regulations out of the way, and we've got to get out from under the boot of this Disaster Management Act.
Mr. Steenhuisen, thank you for your time. That's the DA leader, John Steenhuisen. They're weighing in on a number of issues that have to do with the management of the situation in schools as well as the vaccination programs. That last part is their latest position on mandatory vaccines. They simply do not support that.